My name is Victoria Chen, and for 28 years, I believe the story my family told about me. I was the disappointment, the one who couldn't get anything right, the daughter who chose dreams over dollars and passion over prestige. They wrote me off as a failure so many times that I almost started to believe it myself. Almost. But what they didn't know was that their perfect world, built on secrets and stolen trust, was about to crumble, and I was going to be the one holding the sledgehammer. Let me take you back to where it all began, not to the moment everything fell apart, but to the years before, when I was still trying to fit into a mold that was never made for me. Because to understand what I did, you need to understand what they did to me first. You need to see the slow, steady erosion of my sense of self, the constant message that I wasn't good enough. Would never be good enough, could never be good enough. You need to see how they built their empire on my silence and my compliance, and how that empire was always destined to fall. I grew up in Vancouver, in a neighborhood where every house tried to outshine the next. Our home was a massive Tudor-style estate in Shaughnessy, worth about $1.2 million. It wasn't just a house, it was a statement, a declaration that the Chen family had made it. The driveway was circular, lined with perfectly manicured hedges that my mother had a landscaping crew trim every 2 weeks like clockwork. The exterior was all dark wood beams and cream stucco, with leaded glass windows that caught the light just right during golden hour. Inside, everything was calculated for maximum impression. The foyer had marble floors imported from Italy, a grand staircase with an ornate banister, and a crystal chandelier that my mother claimed was a family heirloom, though I later learned she'd bought it at an estate sale and lied about its provenance. My father, Marcus Chen, was a wealth management consultant. He handled portfolios for some of the richest families in British Columbia. Doctors, tech executives, old money families who'd been in Vancouver for generations. People trusted him with their futures, their retirements, their children's college funds. He was smooth, confident, and had this way of making everyone feel like they were in the safest hands possible. He wore expensive suits, drove a Mercedes, and had business cards with raised lettering that he'd hand out at every opportunity. He was the kind of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room, not because he was particularly charismatic, but because he carried himself like someone who expected deference. And people gave it to him. My mother, Vivian, was the perfect complement. She didn't work, but she worked harder than anyone I knew at maintaining our image. She was on every charity board that mattered in Vancouver. The Art Gallery, the Symphony, the Children's Hospital Foundation. She hosted fundraising galas at our house. Events where women wore gowns that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and men wrote checks with more zeros than I could count. She wore designer labels like Armour, Chanel and Dior and Valentino, and spoke in a voice that was always measured, always controlled, always performing. She was the queen of appearances, and our home was her castle, her stage, her monument to a life well curated. I remember watching her prepare for these events. She'd spend hours arranging flowers, directing caterers, adjusting the lighting until everything was perfect. She'd inspect every detail with the intensity of a general preparing for battle. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. A battle to maintain our position, to prove our worth, to show everyone that we belonged at the top of the social hierarchy. I was expected to participate, to smile and make small talk and represent the family well. But even as a child, I felt like I was playing a part in a play I hadn't auditioned for and didn't understand. Then there was my older sister, Natalie. God, Natalie was everything they wanted in a child. She was 3 years older than me, and from the time we were young, it was clear that she understood the game in a way I never would. She graduated top of her class from UBC's Sauder School of Business. She had internships lined up before she even finished her degree. She worked at a prestigious investment firm downtown, the kind of place with its name in big letters on the side of a glass tower. She wore power suits in shades of black and navy and gray, carried a leather briefcase that she'd received as a graduation gift from my father, and talked about market trends and portfolio diversification over Sunday brunch like it was the most natural thing in the world. My parents looked at her the way people look at a trophy. Pride, ownership, proof that they had done everything right. She was the return on their investment, the evidence that their methods worked, that their values were correct. When Natalie walked into a room, my mother would light up. When Natalie spoke, my father would lean forward, hanging on every word. She was the golden child in every sense, and she wore that title with confidence and grace. And then there was me, Victoria, the odd one out, the artist, the dreamer, the one who didn't quite fit, who never quite fit, who would never quite fit no matter how hard I tried. From the time I was young, I knew I was different. While Natalie was memorizing stock portfolios and reading the Financial Post, I was sketching in notebooks and losing myself in art galleries. While she was networking at corporate events, practicing her elevator pitch, and collecting business cards, I was reading poetry by candlelight and wondering what it meant to create something that mattered. I wanted to make things that touched people, that moved them, that said something true about the human experience. I didn't want to manage other people's money. I didn't want to wear suits and carry briefcases and talk about quarterly projections. I wanted to create things. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to help people find their voices. When it came time for university, the expectation was clear. I would follow in Natalie's footsteps. I would go to UBC, major in business or economics, and prepare for a lucrative career in finance or consulting. That was the path. That was the plan. That was what successful Chen daughters did. But I couldn't do it. I tried, for about 6 months of my first year, to force myself into that mold. I took the business classes, sat through lectures about microeconomics and organizational behavior, and felt my soul slowly dying. Every class felt like torture. Every assignment felt meaningless. I'd sit in those massive lecture halls, surrounded by hundreds of other students frantically taking notes, and I'd feel completely alone, completely lost, completely out of place. So I transferred. I applied to Emily Carr University of Art and Design, and I got in. When I told my parents, you would have thought I'd announced I was dropping out to join a commune. My father's face went red. He set down his fork with a sharp clink against his plate. "You're doing what?" "I'm transferring to Emily Carr," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want to study illustration and visual storytelling." "Absolutely not," he said flatly. "You're not throwing away your future on art school." "It's not throwing away my future," I protested. "It's pursuing what I actually care about." "What you care about doesn't pay the bills," he shot back. "Art is a hobby, Victoria. It's not a career. You'll end up broke and bitter, wondering why you wasted your 20s on pipe dreams." My mother placed her hand on his arm, trying to calm him, but her eyes were full of disappointment. "Darling, we're just concerned. We want you to have stability, security. Art is so uncertain." "Life is uncertain," I said. "At least I'll be doing something I love." Natalie, who had been watching this exchange with thinly veiled amusement, finally spoke up. "Let her do it," she said with a shrug. "Some people need to learn the hard way." That stung more than anything my parents had said. The casual dismissal, the certainty that I was making a mistake, the implication that I was foolish, naive, destined to fail. But I did it anyway. I transferred to Emily Carr, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. The smell of paint and turpentine in the studios. The late nights working on projects with other students who understood what it meant to create something from nothing. The professors who actually cared about ideas and expression and truth, not just profit margins. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But my family never accepted it. Every time I came home for holidays or family dinners, the tension was there, thick and suffocating. They'd ask about my studies in this tone that was half pity, half condescension. They'd make comments about how nice it must be to have hobbies. They'd talk about Natalie's latest promotion or client or bonus, and then they'd turn to me and ask how my little art projects were going. After graduation, I took a job at a small nonprofit organization called Youth Voices. We worked with at-risk youth in East Vancouver, teenagers who'd been failed by the school system, by their families, by society. We taught them art as a form of therapy and expression, as a way to process trauma and find their voices. It was hard work, emotionally draining work, work that didn't pay much, but it mattered. I'd see kids who'd been written off by everyone finally create something beautiful, finally express something they'd been holding inside for years, finally believe that they had value, and in those moments, I knew I'd made the right choice. But to my family, I might as well have been unemployed. Every family dinner was the same painful ritual. We'd gather around that imported Italian table in the formal dining room. The one my mother had spent months selecting because it had to be perfect, had to make the right statement. My father would sit at the head, carving whatever expensive cut of meat my mother had prepared, and he'd ask Natalie about her work. "So, Natalie, how are things at the firm?" he'd ask, his voice warm with genuine interest. She'd launch into detailed descriptions of her latest projects. "We just closed a deal on a commercial property portfolio worth $18 million. I led the due diligence team, and we identified some significant tax advantages that saved the client almost $2 million. My parents would beam. My mother would clasp her hands together. "That's wonderful, darling. You're so talented." My father would nod approvingly. "That's my girl. That's exactly the kind of strategic thinking that builds wealth." They'd discuss strategy and markets and opportunities for another 20 minutes. A conversation that excluded me entirely, not just because I wasn't invited to participate, but because I had nothing to contribute. I didn't speak their language. I didn't understand their world. And they made it very clear that my world wasn't worth understanding. And then, almost as an afterthought, my father would glance at me. "And you, Victoria, still drawing pictures?" The way he said it, like it was something embarrassing. Like I was a child coloring with crayons instead of a grown woman with a degree and a purpose and a calling. "I'm working on a mural project for a community center in East Van," I'd say, trying to keep my voice even, trying to hide how much those 3 words, drawing pictures, hurt. "We're working with 12 teenagers, and they're creating a piece about resilience and hope." My father would nod slowly, that patronizing nod that said he was listening, but not really hearing. That said he was waiting for me to finish, so the conversation could move on to something that actually mattered. "That's nice, but it doesn't pay the bills, does it?" "It pays enough," I'd reply, the same words I'd said 100 times before. "Enough," he'd repeat, as if the word tasted sour. "Natalie's bonus last quarter was more than you make in a year, sweetheart. I'm not trying to be harsh. I just want you to think about your future. About stability, about retirement, about building something that lasts." My mother would chime in, her voice dripping with concern that felt more like criticism than care. "We just worry about you, darling. You're so talented, but talent doesn't build a retirement fund. Natalie has a plan. She's building equity, building a network, building a future. We just wish you'd think more practically." Practically, another word that meant be someone you're not. Be someone we can be proud of. Be someone who makes sense to us. Natalie would sit there, smug and silent, sipping her wine and enjoying the show. She never defended me. Why would she? My failures made her successes shine even brighter. My unconventional choices made her conventional ones seem even wiser. I was her foil, her contrast, the cautionary tale that made her the hero. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. The truth is, I loved my work. I loved it in a way I knew they would never understand. I loved seeing a kid who'd been told they were worthless their entire life finally create something beautiful. I loved watching a teenager who'd been silenced by trauma finally find their voice through art. I loved knowing that what I did mattered, that it changed lives, that it made the world just a little bit better. But in my family, love didn't matter. Passion didn't matter. Impact didn't matter. What mattered was money and status, and the ability to prove your worth through material success. The house was the center of everything. That $1.2 million estate wasn't just where we lived. It was the physical manifestation of everything my parents valued. It was proof of their success, evidence of their superiority, a monument to their ability to climb the social ladder and stay there. My mother treated it like a museum. Every piece of furniture was chosen for maximum impact. Every decoration was strategically placed. Every room was designed to impress. The grand foyer with its marble floors and crystal chandelier was where first impressions were made. The living room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the perfectly manicured gardens, was where my mother entertained her charity board friends. The formal dining room with its imported Italian table was where power was performed over expensive meals. The master suite took up half of the second floor and had a walk-in closet bigger than most people's bedrooms. There were 5 bedrooms total, 4 bathrooms, a library that no one ever used because no one in my family actually read for pleasure, a wine cellar my father had installed to show off his collection, and a 3-car garage that housed his Mercedes, my mother's BMW, and Natalie's Audi. My mother gave tours to her friends, walking them through room by room, describing the provenance of every piece, dropping casual mentions as how much things cost. "This is a genuine Tiffany lamp," she'd say, gesturing to a piece in the living room. "We acquired it at an estate auction. It's worth at least $40,000 now." She'd talk about the custom draperies, the imported tile, the hand-scraped hardwood floors, the designer fixtures. She'd describe renovations they'd done, additions they'd made, upgrades they were planning. The house was her identity, her accomplishment, her proof that she mattered. Natalie talked about inheriting it the way some people talk about destiny. It was assumed, expected, inevitable. She'd walk through the halls like she was already the lady of the manor, pointing out changes she'd make, improvements she'd implement, ways she'd modernize while maintaining the elegance. "When this is mine," she'd say, running her hand along the banister, "I'm going to convert the east wing into a home office. I'll need the space for client meetings, and I'm thinking of updating the kitchen, something more contemporary. Maybe marble countertops and stainless steel appliances." My parents would beam, bursting with pride. Of course it would go to Natalie. She was the one who'd earned it. She was the one who'd followed the path. She was the one who understood its value. I was never even part of that conversation. The house, like everything else of value in our family, was reserved for the child who'd proven worthy. I tried, for a long time, to win their approval. I really did. I brought them to my gallery showings, hoping they'd see my work and understand what it meant to me. I showed them articles written about the nonprofit's impact, hoping they'd recognize that success came in forms other than paychecks. I tried to explain that what I did mattered, that it changed lives, that it made a difference. But they looked at my accomplishments the way you'd look at a participation trophy. Cute, but ultimately meaningless. Nice, but not real success. I remember one particular night that crystallized everything. I had just been featured in a local magazine, Vancouver Magazine, for my work with youth art programs. It was a 3-page spread with photos of the murals we'd created and interviews with some of the teenagers I'd worked with. It was a big deal for me. It was validation that my work mattered, that it was being recognized, that it was making an impact beyond the small circles I usually moved in. I brought a copy to dinner, nervous but hopeful. Maybe this would be different. Maybe this would be the thing that finally made them see me, really see me, and understand that I'd chosen a different path, not because I was a failure, but because I was following my calling. I slid it across the table to my father, my hands trembling slightly. "I thought you might want to see this." He picked it up, glanced at the cover, A photo of me standing in front of one of our murals, and flicked through it without really reading. His eyes scanned the pages for maybe 30 seconds, long enough to skim the headlines, but not long enough to actually absorb anything. Then he set it down, pushed it slightly to the side, and cut another piece of his steak. "That's great, Victoria. Really. I'm glad you're getting some recognition." He paused, chewed, swallowed, and then looked at me with those eyes that always seemed to see through me rather than at me. "But you know what would be even better? If you use that creativity in a marketing firm. You could make real money, have a real career, use your talents in a way that actually builds wealth." A real career. As if everything I'd done was fake, as if the lies I touched didn't count, as if the only measure of reality was a salary and a title and a 401k. My mother reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that was supposed to be comforting, but felt condescending. "We're proud of you, sweetheart. We really are. We just want more for you." More. They always wanted more. But what they really meant was different. They wanted me to be Natalie. They wanted me to fit into their world, to speak their language, to value what they valued. And I never would. I couldn't. Something fundamental in me resisted, rebelled, refused. Natalie sat across from me, and when I caught her eye, she was smiling. A small, satisfied smile that said she was enjoying this. Enjoying watching me fail to meet expectations once again. Enjoying her position as the favored daughter. The years went on like this. I was always on the outside, looking in at a family that felt more like a corporation than a home. I was the disappointing investment, the stock that never performed, the asset that lost value instead of gained it, and I had accepted it. In a way, I'd built my own life, my own sense of worth, outside of their approval. I had friends who valued me for who I was. I had work that fulfilled me. I had a purpose that didn't require their validation. But the pain was still there, working beneath the surface. The feeling of never being enough, never being seen, never being valued. It was a constant, low-level ache that I'd learned to live with, the way you learn to live with chronic pain. You adjust, you adapt, you find ways to function despite it. But then everything changed. It started on a Tuesday morning in late September. The air had that crisp quality that signaled fall was settling in, that summer's warmth was fading, that change was coming. I was in my small studio apartment in Kitsilano, a one-bedroom place with high ceilings and big windows that caught the morning light. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I decorated it with art from local artists, prints I'd collected over the years, and my own work covered the walls. There were plants everywhere, thriving in the natural light, and the space smelled like coffee and acrylic paint. I was working on sketches for a new project, a series of portraits I was planning to do, about women who'd survived domestic violence. I had my headphones on, listening to music, completely absorbed in the work. When my phone rang, I almost didn't answer. But then I saw the name, Mom. That alone was strange. My mother rarely called me directly, unless it was to invite me to some obligatory family event or to ask me to do something for her. We weren't the kind of mother and daughter who chatted casually on the phone. Our relationship had always been formal, distant, transactional. I answered. "Hello?" Victoria, her voice was tight, strained, shaking in a way I'd never heard before. My mother prided herself on control, on never showing weakness or emotion in public. Hearing her like this sent a shock of adrenaline through my system. "Mom? What's wrong?" "You need to come home, now." Her voice cracked on the last word. "What happened? Is someone hurt?" "Just come. Please." And she hung up. I stood there staring at my phone, my heart pounding. Something was very wrong. I grabbed my keys and my bag and ran out the door. The drive from Kitsilano to Shaughnessy usually took about 20 minutes, but I made it in 15, breaking several speed limits and running at least one yellow light that was closer to red. My mind was racing through possibilities. Had someone been in an accident? Was my father okay? Was Natalie okay? Despite everything, despite the years of dismissal and disappointment, they were still my family. And in that moment, all I could think was that I needed to get there, needed to make sure everyone was okay. When I pulled up to the house, the first thing I noticed was that there were two cars in the driveway I didn't recognize. One was a black Audi sedan with government plates. The other was an unmarked police car. My stomach dropped. I walked in through the front door without knocking. The house, usually so carefully curated and controlled, was in chaos. I could hear raised voices coming from my father's office, sharp and angry and overlapping. My mother was in the living room, pacing back and forth in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows, wringing her hands in a way that looked almost violent. She'd always been so composed, so careful about her appearance, but now her hair was disheveled and her makeup was smudged, like she'd been crying and didn't care who saw. Natalie was there too, sitting on the couch with her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her expression hard and closed. She was still in her work clothes, a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She looked up when I walked in, and the look on her face was pure fury. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice sounding strange in my own ears, too high and too thin. My mother looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in her eyes. Not concern, not worry, but visceral, bone-deep fear. Her hands were shaking. Her face was pale. She looked like someone who'd just watched their entire world collapse. "Your father," she started, then stopped, pressing her fingers to her temples like she was trying to hold her head together through sheer force of will. "There's been an accusation. A serious one." "What kind of accusation?" I asked, moving closer to her. Natalie answered before my mother could, her voice cold and sharp as a knife. "Fraud. Embezzlement. Investment fraud." Apparently, Dad's been running a Ponzi scheme, using new clients' money to pay off old clients and skimming off the top to fund our lifestyle. It's been going on for years. The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced around in my head like foreign objects, unable to find purchase. My father, the man who preached financial stability and smart investments and responsible wealth management, was a fraud? A man whose entire career was built on trust and competence and reliability had been stealing from his clients? "What?" I managed to say. "The authorities are here," my mother said, her voice breaking. "They're questioning him. His clients are furious. Some of them have lost everything. Their retirement savings, their children's college funds, everything. There are lawsuits being filed. The regulatory board has frozen all his accounts. The firm has fired him. Everything is falling apart." I stood there, frozen, trying to process what I was hearing. My father had been running a Ponzi scheme, a classic financial fraud, taking money from new investors to pay returns to old investors, all while siphoning funds to maintain our expensive lifestyle. The big house, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, the galas and charity events and expensive vacations, all of it built on stolen money. "How bad is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Bad," Natalie said flatly, her arms still crossed, her jaw tight. "Really bad. He could go to prison. We could lose everything. The house, the savings, all of it. And our name, our reputation, everything we've built, it's destroyed. Completely destroyed." My mother started crying then, quiet, broken sobs. Controlled sobs that shook her whole body but didn't make much sound. Even in crisis, she was trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. "This will ruin us," she whispered. "Everyone will know. All our friends, everyone in our social circle, the charity boards, everyone will know what he did. We'll be pariahs." I felt a strange mix of emotions washing over me. Shock, certainly. My father, the pillar of financial wisdom, was a criminal. Anger, too. He destroyed people's lives, stolen their futures, betrayed their trust. And underneath it all, something darker that I was almost ashamed to acknowledge. A bitter satisfaction. The perfect family wasn't so perfect after all. The empire built on judgment and superiority was actually built on lies and theft. Everything they'd valued, their reputation, their status, their position, was about to come crashing down. The door to my father's office opened, and two men in suits came out, followed by my father. He looked like a stranger. His usually perfect hair was mussed. His tie was loosened. His face was gray and drawn, aged 10 years in what must have been just a few hours. He saw me standing there, and something flickered in his eyes. Shame? Anger? I couldn't tell. "Mr. Chen," one of the suited men said, his voice professional and cold, "we'll be in touch. Don't leave the city." My father nodded mutely. The men left, and the house fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. My father looked at each of us, my mother, Natalie, me, and then turned and walked back into his office, closing the door behind him with a soft click that somehow felt louder than a slam. Over the next few days, the story unfolded like a nightmare playing out in slow motion. The local news picked it up. Prominent Vancouver wealth manager accused of multi-million-dollar fraud. The story ran on TV, online, in newspapers. Our name, which had once opened doors and commanded respect, was now synonymous with betrayal and corruption. The details that emerged were damning. My father had been falsifying investment reports for over a decade. He'd been moving money between accounts to hide losses. He'd been paying old clients with new clients' funds, the classic Ponzi scheme structure. When the market turned and new investments slowed down, the whole house of cards collapsed. Dozens of families had lost their life savings. Retirement funds, gone. College funds, evaporated. People who had trusted Marcus Chen with their financial futures were financially ruined. The phone rang constantly, angry clients screaming threats and accusations. My mother stopped answering. She stopped leaving the house entirely. She'd sit in the living room for hours, staring out the windows at the gardens she'd worked so hard to perfect, and I could see her mentally cataloging everything she was about to lose. Natalie took a leave of absence from her firm. The connection to my father was too toxic, too damaging to her own reputation. She stayed at the house, but she barely spoke. She spent most of her time on the phone with lawyers, trying to figure out what could be salvaged, what could be protected, what could be hidden. And my father locked himself in his study and refused to speak to anyone. I went to see him 3 days after the news broke. I needed to understand. I needed to hear from him directly what had happened, why he'd done it, how it had gotten to this point. I knocked on his study door. Silence. I knocked again. Still nothing. "Dad," I called through the door. "I need to talk to you." More silence. I tried the handle. It was unlocked. I opened the door slowly. He was sitting at his desk, the same desk where he'd managed his clients' portfolios, where he'd made his calls, where he'd run his fraudulent scheme. He was staring at nothing, his hands folded in front of him, his expression blank. "Dad," I said softly, stepping into the room. He didn't look at me. "You should go, Victoria. I just want to understand." "There's nothing to understand," he snapped, finally meeting my eyes. There was something wild in his gaze, something desperate and cornered. "I made mistakes. I tried to fix them. I couldn't. That's it. That's the whole story." "Mistakes?" I said, my voice rising despite my intention to stay calm. "You stole from people. You lied to them for years. You destroyed their lives. These aren't mistakes. These are crimes." He flinched like I'd hit him. "I was trying to provide for this family. I was trying to give you all everything you needed, everything you wanted. The house, the lifestyle, the opportunities. We didn't ask you to steal for us," I said, feeling heat rising in my chest, anger replacing the shock. "We didn't ask you to ruin people's lives so we could live in a big house." His expression twisted into something ugly. "You," he said, pointing at me. "You never appreciated any of it anyway. You looked down on us for caring about money and success. You judged us constantly with your holier-than-thou attitude about meaningful work and helping people. Maybe if you'd been more supportive, more ambitious yourself, more like your sister, I wouldn't have felt so much pressure to. I cut him off. Don't you dare blame me for your crimes. Don't you dare make this about me not being enough for you. You did this. You chose this. This is on you. But I could see it in his eyes. He'd already rewritten the narrative in his head. He was the victim, driven to desperate measures by an ungrateful family, by a daughter who never appreciated his sacrifices, by the pressure to maintain appearances. In his mind, he was the tragic figure, not the criminal. I left that room shaking with rage, more angry than I'd ever been in my life. Not just at what he'd done, but at his refusal to take responsibility, his immediate deflection of blame onto everyone but himself. A week later, things got worse. My family called a meeting. Natalie had arranged it, and when she spoke, she sounded like a CEO addressing underperforming employees, rather than a daughter talking to her family. We sat in the dining room, that expensive imported Italian table now feeling like a courtroom bench. The food my mother had prepared, some half-hearted attempt at normalcy, sat untouched. We need to talk about moving forward, Natalie said, her hands folded on the table in front of her, her voice businesslike and cold. As a family, we need to present a united front. We need to show the public, the courts, the media, that we're cooperating fully, that we had no knowledge of Dad's activities, that we're victims in this too. We are victims, my mother said weakly, reaching for her wine glass with a trembling hand. No, I said, unable to stay quiet. Dad's actual victims are victims. The people who lost their savings, their homes, their futures, they're victims. We're just collateral damage from living with a criminal. Natalie's eyes narrowed dangerously. This isn't the time for your moral high ground, Victoria. This isn't the time for you to lecture us about right and wrong. I'm not lecturing anyone, I said, feeling my pulse quicken. I'm just being honest about what happened. Honest, Natalie repeated, her voice dripping with disdain. You want to talk about honesty? Let's be honest then. You've spent your entire life judging us, looking down on us for caring about success and financial security. Your constant disapproval, your self-righteous attitude about money being evil and ambition being shallow, it created an environment of incredible pressure. Dad felt like he could never do enough, could never be enough for this family. Your judgment drove him to take bigger and bigger risks to prove his worth. I stared at her, genuinely stunned. Are you seriously trying to blame me for this? For his crimes? I'm saying, she continued, her voice sharp enough to cut, that your presence in this family, your constant reminder that we were never good enough for your impossibly high moral standards, contributed to an environment where Dad felt desperate to prove himself. My mother, broken and desperate, nodded slowly, not meeting my eyes. She has a point, Victoria. You always did make us feel judged, like nothing we did was ever right, like our values were wrong and yours were superior. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were rewriting history in real time, twisting the narrative to make me the villain. I was the black sheep, the outsider, the one who'd never fit in. And now I was being made into the scapegoat, the reason for my father's crimes, the catalyst for the family's downfall. This is insane, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of disbelief and rage. I had nothing to do with his crimes. I didn't ask him to steal. I didn't pressure him to commit fraud. I just wanted to live my own life and follow my own path. But that path, Natalie said coldly, came with constant judgment of ours. And frankly, Victoria, we need to distance ourselves from anything that makes us look bad in the public eye. That includes you. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. The room seemed to tilt. What are you saying? I asked quietly, though I already knew. I could see it in their faces, in the set of Natalie's jaw, in the way my mother still wouldn't meet my eyes. Natalie took a deep breath, like she was about to deliver a difficult business decision, rather than destroy what was left of our family. We're saying it's time for you to leave. We're officially disassociating from you. For the good of what's left of this family's reputation. Disassociating. The word was clinical, brutal, deliberately chosen for its cold professionalism. Like I was a bad investment being divested, a failing business unit being shut down, a liability being removed from the balance sheet. My mother finally looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed but determined. It's for the best, Victoria. We need to show a unified image to the courts, to the public. We need to prove that we're a respectable family that was deceived by one member. And you were never really part of our world. You said so yourself many times. This is just making official what has always been true. Never really part of this. 28 years of my life, and I was being erased like a line item in a budget, like an expense that could be cut, like I'd never mattered at all. So that's it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, trying to comprehend the full scope of what was happening. You're kicking me out, blaming me for Dad's crimes, disowning me. We're protecting what's left of this family, Natalie said with finality. We're making the hard choices necessary for survival, something you never understood how to do, because you were too busy being idealistic and impractical. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady beneath me. I looked at each of them in turn. My mother, weak and complicit, choosing preservation of reputation over her own daughter. My sister, cold and calculating, seeing me as nothing more than a strategic liability. My father, still locked in his study, absent even in this moment of ultimate betrayal. You know what? I said, and I was surprised by how strong my voice sounded, how clear and certain. You're right about one thing. I was never really part of this. Because this, I gestured around the room, at the expensive furniture and crystal and fine china, at all the trappings of their carefully constructed life. This was always a lie. This was always built on something rotten. And I'm glad I never fit in. I'm glad I never became like you. I walked toward the door, and Natalie called after me, her voice mocking. Enjoy your righteousness, Victoria. I hope it keeps you warm at night when you have nothing else. I turned back to look at her one last time. I'll have something you'll never have, I said. I'll have my integrity. I'll have the knowledge that I didn't build my life on other people's suffering. That's worth more than this house, more than your savings, more than any of it. And I walked out. I made it to my car before the tears came. I sat behind the wheel, hands gripping it so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I cried. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook my whole body. Not because I'd lost them. I'd never really had them in the way that mattered. But because I'd wasted so many years trying to earn the love of people who were fundamentally incapable of giving it. Because I'd let their judgment shape my sense of self for so long. Because even knowing intellectually that they were wrong, it still hurt to be rejected so completely and finally. I cried for the daughter I'd been, desperate for approval. I cried for the woman I was, strong enough to walk away, but still wounded by the walking. I cried for the family that could have been, but never was. And then, slowly, the tears dried. And as they dried, something else took root in their place, something cold and hard and sharp. They had thrown me away. They had blamed me for crimes I didn't commit. They had disowned me to protect their precious reputation, which meant I owed them nothing, nothing at all. And that realization, that absolute freedom from obligation, opened up a universe of possibilities I'd never allowed myself to consider before. I drove home in a daze, barely seeing the road in front of me. When I got back to my apartment, I made tea and sat by the window, watching the sun set over the city, and I thought about power, about control, about justice. My family had controlled the narrative of my life for 28 years. They'd defined me as the failure, the disappointment, the one who didn't measure up. They'd written the story, cast the roles, and I played the part they'd assigned me. But what if I stopped playing their game? What if I wrote my own story? What if I took control? The idea was barely formed, More of a feeling than a plan, but it was there, like a spark waiting to ignite, whispering in the back of my mind. A question, a possibility, a spark of something that would soon become a fire. What if I didn't let them control the narrative anymore? What if I took back the power? That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking. My family was about to lose everything. The house would be seized as part of my father's asset forfeiture. His savings, investments, everything, gone. And what would I get? Nothing. I'd get the satisfaction of being right, of maintaining my moral high ground, of knowing I'd never compromised my values. But satisfaction and moral high ground didn't pay rent, didn't build a future, didn't give me any sense of justice for the years of dismissal and diminishment. There had to be another way. There had to be something I could do. I got up and went to my laptop. I started searching public records, diving into databases I'd never bothered with before, because I'd never cared about their assets or their money. But now I cared, because if they were going to lose everything anyway, if creditors and lawyers and the government were going to divide up the spoils, why shouldn't I have a say? Why shouldn't I protect my own interests? I searched for hours, following threads and connections, learning about asset seizures and legal proceedings. And then, buried deep in property records from 18 years ago, I found something that made my heart stop. A document. A quitclaim deed, filed with the Provincial Land Registry Office. The house. The $1.2 million Shaughnessy estate. That was the centerpiece of my family's identity. The monument to their success. The symbol of everything they valued. That's when it stopped. The title had been transferred. Not to a trust. Not to my mother. Not to Natalie. To me, M. My name, right there in official legal documents. Victoria May Chen. Listed as the sole owner of the property at 2147 Cypress Lane. I read it 3 times, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I checked the date. 18 years ago. I would have been 10 years old. Strong Emba, I vaguely remembered that time. There had been some legal trouble, a client threatening to sue my father over losses in a bad investment. My parents had been stressed, talking in hushed voices about protecting their assets. I'd been too young to understand or care, but apparently, my father had moved some properties around to shield them from potential litigation, and he'd transferred the house to me. It must have been a temporary maneuver, a shell game to keep the property safe on paper while the legal threat passed. And then, in his arrogance, in his absolute certainty that I was too insignificant to ever matter, in his assumption that I'd never have the initiative or the knowledge to check these things, he'd never reversed it. The deed was legal, properly filed, never undone, and according to this document, I owned the house. The $1.2 million house that was supposed to be seized to pay my father's victims. The house that was Natalie's destiny. The house that was my mother's pride. I owned it. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, and for the first time in days, I smiled. Actually smiled. A real, genuine smile that reached my eyes and made my cheeks hurt. They had called me worthless, a failure, a disappointment. They had thrown me away like garbage, blamed me for crimes I didn't commit, erased me from their family. But they had also, in their arrogance and their underestimation of me, handed me the keys to their kingdom. The question was, what was I going to do with them? If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. I printed out the deed and spent the rest of the night thinking, planning, considering every angle. By the time the sun came up, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. It was about taking control of my own story. It was about making sure that after years of being powerless in my own family, I finally had power over something that mattered. The next morning, I started making calls. I needed to verify that this wasn't just a technicality that could be easily reversed. I needed to know if this was real, if it could stand up in court, if it gave me actual legal ownership. I found Diana Kovalenko through recommendations online. She had a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and expensive, exactly the kind of lawyer who could tell me the truth without sugarcoating it. Her office was in a sleek high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and intimidation. When I called, her assistant tried to put me off, saying Miss Kovalenko's schedule was full for the next month. "Tell her it's about the Chen fraud case," I said. "Tell her I have information about undisclosed assets. Tell her I need an appointment immediately." That got her attention. 2 hours later, I was sitting in Diana Kovalenko's office, a space that was as no-nonsense as its occupant. No unnecessary decorations, no softness. Just a massive desk, walls of law books, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Diana herself was exactly what I'd expected. Mid-40s, short suit in charcoal gray, hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes that assessed and calculated in seconds. She shook my hand with a grip that was firm, bordering on aggressive. "Miss Chen," she said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. "You said this was urgent." "It is," I replied, sitting down and pulling out my folder of documents. I slid the deed across her desk. "I need to know if this is real, if it's legally enforceable, if it gives me actual ownership." She picked it up, her expression neutral, and began to read. Then she turned to her computer, pulling up databases and cross-referencing information. The silence stretched on. I could barely breathe, my entire body tense with anticipation. Everything depended on what she said next. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 5 minutes, she looked up. "This is a legally executed quitclaim deed, properly filed 18 years ago with the BC Land Title and Survey Authority. According to this, and according to the current records I'm looking at right now, you are the registered owner of the property at 2147 Cypress Lane, Shaughnessy." "But my family is living there," I said, leaning forward, "and my father's assets are being seized because of his fraud case. Won't they take the house as part of that?" Diana leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers in front of her, and I could see her lawyer brain working through the implications. "Not if the house isn't his asset. The transfer happened 18 years ago, more than a decade before any of his criminal activity began. If this deed stands, and I see no reason why it wouldn't, then the property is yours, not his. His creditors can only seize assets that belong to him. They can't touch an asset he hasn't owned for nearly 2 decades. My heart was racing. "So I could sell it?" "You could do whatever you want with it," she said, a hint of something that might have been approval in her eyes. "It's your property. You could sell it, rent it, tear it down and build condos. You're the owner." "But they'll fight it," I said. "My family. They'll say it was a mistake, that it was never meant to be permanent, that there was some kind of understanding that it would be reversed." Diana's expression didn't change. "They can try. They can file motions and contest the deed and make all sorts of claims, but the burden of proof is on them. They'd have to demonstrate that the deed was fraudulent or obtained through coercion, or that there was a written agreement to reverse the transfer. Without documentation, without evidence beyond verbal claims about intentions, this deed stands, and given your father's current legal situation, given that he's facing criminal charges for fraud and has zero credibility, I seriously doubt he has the resources or the standing to mount an effective challenge." I sat back, letting it sink in. It was real. The house was mine. Legally, officially, mine. "What would you recommend I do?" I asked. Diana smiled then, a small, knowing smile that made her look almost predatory. "That depends on what you want to accomplish. But if I were in your position, I'd move quickly. I'd file a motion to confirm ownership and to prevent the property from being included in your father's asset seizure. I'd assert my rights before they even realize what's happening. Speed and decisiveness win these battles. And if I wanted to sell it, then I'd recommend you hire a real estate agent immediately, someone discreet who can handle high-value properties and sensitive situations. I can make a recommendation if you'd like." Please, I said. She picked up her phone and made a call. Marcus? Diana Kovalenko. I have a client who needs your services. High-value Shaughnessy property, complicated family situation, needs to move fast. Yes, exactly that case. Perfect. I'm sending her your way. She hung up and wrote down a name and number on her business card, sliding it across the desk to me. Marcus Lee. He's one of the best luxury real estate agents in the city, and he's handled messier situations than this. Divorces, estate battles, family feuds. He'll get you top dollar, and he knows how to be discreet. Thank you, I said, taking the card. One more thing, Diana said, her expression serious. This will destroy what's left of your relationship with your family. You understand that, right? There's no coming back from this. I met her eyes steadily. They already destroyed our relationship when they blamed me for my father's crimes and threw me out. I'm just making sure I don't come out of this with nothing. She nodded approvingly. Then let's get started. By the end of that week, I had my team in place. Diana was handling the legal side, filing motions to confirm my ownership and to block any attempts to include the property in my father's asset seizure. And she'd connected me with Marcus Lee, who turned out to be everything she'd promised. I met Marcus at a cafe in Yaletown. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with an easy confidence and a designer watch that probably cost more than my car. But he was also sharp and professional, and when I explained the situation, he didn't bat an eye. I've dealt with messier situations than this. He assured me sipping an espresso, bitter divorces where both parties were trying to hide assets from each other, estate battles where siblings were at each other's throats, family feuds that made the Capulets and Montagues look friendly. This is sensitive, but it's manageable. I can get you top dollar, and I can keep it quiet until you're ready to go public. How fast can you move? I asked. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through contacts. For a property like this, in Shaughnessy, in this market, I have 3 clients actively looking for exactly this kind of house. I could have viewings scheduled within a week and offers within 2. Maybe sooner. Do it, I said. He smiled. Consider it done. The wheels were in motion. Diana filed the paperwork to assert my ownership. It was a strategic strike, moving before my family even realized what was happening. The legal documents would hit the courthouse and my family at the same time. I went home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Powerful. In control. For my entire life, I'd been acted upon. I had been the object of other people's decisions, other people's judgments, other people's narratives. But now, finally, I was the one taking action. I was the one making decisions. I was the one controlling the narrative. 2 days later, my phone rang. Natalie. I stared at the screen for a long moment, considering not answering, but I wanted to hear her reaction. I wanted to hear the shock in her voice when she realized that the worthless failure of a sister had just pulled off a move she never saw coming. I answered, "Hello, Natalie. What the hell do you think you're doing?" She didn't bother with pleasantries, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I'm exercising my rights as a property owner," I said calmly, keeping my voice level and professional, the way she'd always spoken to me during our business discussions. "You don't own that house," she hissed. "That deed is a mistake. A legal error. A technicality that was never meant to be permanent. You know that." "Actually," I said, and I could hear the steel in my own voice, "I don't know that. What I know is that my name is on a legal document that has been properly filed and recorded for 18 years. What I know is that I am listed as the owner of 2147 Cypress Lane in all official records, and I haven't seen any evidence to the contrary." There was a pause, and I could hear her breathing, sharp and angry. "You can't do this. That house is our home. It's Mom's home. It's where we grew up. You can't just take it." I'd said, my voice hardening despite my efforts to stay calm. "Until you kicked me out. Until you disowned me. Until you blamed me for Dad's crimes and threw me away like I was nothing. Remember that conversation, Natalie? Remember telling me I was never really part of the family?" "We were protecting the family," she snapped. "No," I said, and now the anger was bleeding through, hot and sharp. You were protecting yourselves, and you threw me under the bus to do it. So now I'm protecting myself. I'm making sure I don't come out of this disaster with nothing. I'm taking what's legally mine. This is revenge, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. This is you being petty and vindictive. You're no better than Dad. That stung, but I didn't let it show. No, Natalie, this is justice. This is me making sure that for once in my life, I'm not the one who loses everything. Goodbye. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, adrenaline coursing through my system. But I felt alive. I felt powerful. For the first time in my life, I'd stood up to Natalie and won. The legal battles started almost immediately. My family hired a lawyer, some friend of my father's, who probably owed him favors, to contest the deed. Their argument was exactly what I'd expected, flimsy and desperate. They claimed the transfer had been a temporary measure, never meant to be permanent, based on an oral understanding between my father and me. The problem was, I'd been 10 years old at the time. The idea that I'd entered into any kind of understanding about property transfers was absurd on its face. Diana destroyed them in court. I sat in the gallery watching her work, and it was like watching a masterclass in legal argument. Your Honor, she said, her voice crisp and clear, carrying easily through the courtroom. The deed in question was legally executed according to all requirements of British Columbia property law. It was properly witnessed, properly notarized, properly filed with the Land Title Office. It has been on record for 18 years. The respondents have provided no evidence, no written agreements, no documentation, no contemporaneous records of any intention to reverse this transfer. Their claim is based entirely on oral assertions made after the fact, after my client's father was charged with fraud, after their assets were frozen, after they desperately needed to find a way to protect this property from seizure. Their claim is not supported by evidence. It's supported by wishful thinking and regret. She paused, looking directly at the judge. The law does not operate on assumptions and oral agreements made decades ago with a child. The law operates on documentation, and the documentation is crystal clear. My client is the legal owner of this property. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, reviewed the documents Diana had submitted. She looked at the opposing lawyer's arguments, and then she looked at my family's attorney. Counselor, do you have any documentation to support your client's claim that this was meant to be a temporary transfer? The lawyer shuffled papers, clearly uncomfortable. Your Honor, the understanding was verbal. Mr. Chen can testify to his intentions at the time. Mr. Chen, the judge said dryly, is currently facing criminal fraud charges and has demonstrated a willingness to deceive and manipulate in financial matters. His testimony about his intentions 18 years ago holds very little weight without corroborating documentation. She banged her gavel. Motion denied. The deed stands. Miss Victoria Chen is confirmed as the legal owner of 2147 Cypress Lane. This property is not part of Marcus Ten's asset seizure. It was over. I'd won. I walked out of that courthouse feeling like I was floating. Diana walked beside me, a satisfied smile on her face. Congratulations, she said. The house is officially, undeniably yours. Thank you, I said, for everything. My pleasure. Now go sell that house and move on with your life. Marcus moved fast. Just like he'd promised, he listed the property as a private sale. No public MLS listing, no for sale sign on the lawn that would alert the neighbors and create gossip. Just targeted outreach to pre-qualified, high-net-worth buyers who were actively looking in Shaughnessy. Within 3 days, he called me. I have 3 serious offers, but there's one that's really strong. Tech executive who's been looking in Shaughnessy for 8 months. He's in love with the house from the photos. He's offering $1.25 million, all cash. Wants to close in 30 days. $1.25 million. $50,000 more than the house was worth. $50,000 more than my parents had paid for it. More than it had been assessed at. More than anyone expected. Take it, I said without hesitation. You don't want to see if we can get more? No. I want this done. I want to move forward. Take the offer. You got it. I'll have the paperwork to you by tomorrow. But before the sale could close, there was one thing I had to do. One final move that I knew would hurt them more than anything else. One last assertion of my power and my control. I had to go back to the house. Marcus had arranged a final walkthrough with the buyers, standard procedure before closing. I told him I wanted to be there. He advised against it, said it would be awkward, said my presence might make the buyers uncomfortable. I don't care, I said. It's my house. I want to be there. He sighed but agreed. Okay, but if they back out because of family drama, that's on you. They won't back out, I said with certainty. They want the house too much. The walkthrough was scheduled for 2 p.m. on a cold Saturday in November. I arrived 15 minutes early, parking down the street and walking up to the house I'd grown up in. It looked the same as it always had, imposing, immaculate. A perfect facade hiding a rotten core. I walked up the front steps and rang the doorbell. I could have used a key, technically. As the owner, I had every right to, but I wanted this to feel official. I wanted them to have to answer the door to me. I wanted them to have to let me in. My mother opened the door. She looked terrible. The woman who'd always been so carefully put together, so conscious of her appearance, was wearing sweatpants and a stained shirt. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her face was pale and drawn, with deep circles under her eyes. She'd aged 10 years in the 6 weeks since I'd last seen her. Victoria, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Hello, Mother, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I'm here for the walkthrough. She stepped aside, saying nothing, not meeting my eyes. Inside, the house felt different. The air was heavy, thick with tension and defeat. The furniture was still in place, but there were boxes stacked in corners, evidence that they were packing, preparing to leave. Natalie appeared from the living room. She was dressed for work, even though it was Saturday, wearing one of her power suits like armor. But the effect was ruined by the fury in her eyes, the tightness of her jaw, the way her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. You didn't have to come, she said, her voice cold enough to freeze water. Actually, I did, I replied evenly. It's my house. I want to make sure everything is in order for the new owners. She repeated, her voice dripping with venom. You're really gonna do this? You're really gonna throw us out onto the street? I'm not throwing you out onto the street, I corrected. I'm selling a property that legally belongs to me. What you do after that, where you go, how you handle it, that's your decision, not my responsibility. Where are we supposed to go? My mother asked, her voice breaking with the question she'd asked before. As if repeating it would somehow change my mind, would somehow make me feel guilty enough to stop. I looked at her, and for a moment I felt a flicker of something. Not quite pity, not quite compassion, but a shadow of the daughter I used to be, the one who'd wanted so desperately to make her mother proud, to earn her love, to be enough for her. But then I remembered. I remembered her standing beside Natalie, agreeing that I was to blame. I remembered her saying I was never really part of the family. I remembered her choosing her reputation over her daughter. I remembered every dismissal, every criticism, every moment she'd made me feel small. You'll figure it out, I said, my voice harder than I intended. You're resourceful. You've always been good at maintaining appearances. I'm sure you'll land on your feet. The doorbell rang. The buyers had arrived. Marcus let them in, a young couple in their early 30s, both doctors at Vancouver General Hospital. They were excited and nervous, the way people are when they're about to make the biggest purchase of their lives. They introduced themselves, Dr. James Way and Dr. Sarah Patel, and shook hands with everyone, oblivious to the tension crackling through the air. Thank you so much for accommodating us, Sarah said warmly. We know this must be a difficult time. My mother tried to smile, tried to be the gracious hostess she'd always been. Of course. Please, look around. I watched as they walked through the house, room by room, and I saw it through their eyes. They weren't seeing a monument to my family's superiority. They weren't seeing the backdrop for years of judgment and disappointment. They were seeing their future home. A place where they'd raise children, host friends, build a life. They talked excitedly about what they'd do with each space. "This living room is perfect for entertaining," James said. "And look at these windows. The natural light is incredible." Sarah was already planning the kitchen. "We could put in an island here, update the appliances, maybe open this wall to make it more of an open concept." They were going to change it, tear down walls, update fixtures, paint from my mother's carefully chosen colors. They were going to erase the Chen family's presence entirely and replace it with their own. The thought made Wiz smile. My mother watched them with barely concealed horror, like she was watching someone defile a sacred space. Natalie stood in the corner, arms crossed, radiating fury, but saying nothing. She knew any outburst would jeopardize the sale, and as much as she hated me, she wasn't stupid enough to create a scene in front of the buyers. The walkthrough took about an hour. The buyers were thorough, checking every room, every closet, asking questions about electrical systems and plumbing and when the roof had last been replaced. Marcus handled their questions professionally, and I stayed mostly silent, just present. Just making sure my family understood that I was in control now. Finally, they finished. "Everything looks perfect," James said, smiling. "We're so excited to make this our home." "We'll see you at the closing," Sarah added. They left, and the house fell into silence. Marcus gathered his papers, made some notes, and then looked at me. "I'll be in touch with final details. Closing is scheduled for next Friday at 2 p.m. "I'll be there," I said. He left, and then it was just me and my family, the three of us standing in the foyer, the crystal chandelier hanging overhead like a judgment. My mother broke first. "Amelia," she said, using my middle name like she used to when I was a child, like it might trigger some old sense of filial duty. "How could you do this? This is our home, your home. We raised you here. Don't you have any sense of family loyalty?" "Family loyalty?" I repeated, and I heard my voice rise, despite my intention to stay calm. "You want to talk about family loyalty? You disowned me. You blamed me for crimes I didn't commit. You threw me out when I needed you most. Where was the family loyalty then? We were in crisis," she said desperately. "We were trying to survive." "You have to understand the pressure we were under." "I understand perfectly," I said. "I understand that when things got hard, you needed a scapegoat. You needed someone to blame. And I was convenient, the daughter who'd always been a disappointment anyway, the one who'd never fit in, the one you could sacrifice to protect yourselves." Natalie stepped forward, her voice cold and controlled. "You're really going to play the victim here, after you've stolen our home?" "I didn't steal anything," I said, meeting her eyes steadily. "The house was legally mine, has been legally mine for 18 years. I'm just exercising my rights as the owner." "Legal technicality," she spat. "You know damn well that deed was never meant to be permanent. You're exploiting a mistake to punish us." "No," I said, my voice rising. "I'm protecting myself. I'm making sure that after years of being treated like I don't matter, after being blamed for things I didn't do, after being thrown away like garbage, I don't come out of this disaster with nothing. You taught me, Natalie. You and Dad and Mom. You taught me that the only thing that matters is assets and power and winning. You taught me that sentiment is a weakness, and that you have to look out for yourself first. I was a slow learner, but I finally got the lesson." "You're vindictive," my mother said, tears streaming down her face now. "You're cruel and vindictive, and you're destroying what's left of this family." "No, Mom," I said, and I felt something crack inside me, not in a breaking way, but in a breaking open way, like a shell falling away to reveal something harder underneath. The family was already destroyed. Dad destroyed it when he stole from his clients. You destroyed it when you blamed me instead of him. Natalie destroyed it when she made me the scapegoat. I'm not destroying anything. I'm just refusing to be destroyed along with it." I walked past them, my footsteps echoing on the marble floor, and I went from room to room one last time. Not because I was nostalgic, not because I was saying goodbye to happy memories, but because I wanted to see it all clearly, wanted to see it for what it really was. The formal dining room where I'd sat through 1,000 uncomfortable meals, always feeling like I didn't belong. The living room where I'd been lectured about my lack of ambition. The kitchen where my mother had perfected her recipes, not because she loved cooking, but because impressive dinner parties were part of the image. The library where no one actually read because my family didn't value literature, they valued appearance. The master bedroom where my parents had slept, dreaming of status and wealth and superiority. I ended up in my old bedroom. It was on the 3rd floor, tucked away in a corner, the smallest bedroom in the house. They'd already started packing it up, boxing my old things to be disposed of or stored. I stood in the doorway, looking at the space where I'd spent so many nights feeling alone and misunderstood and not enough. This house had never been a home. It had been a stage, a museum, a monument to values I didn't share. Selling it wasn't a betrayal. It was a liberation. I went back downstairs. My family had moved into the living room. My father had finally emerged from his study, looking even worse than my mother. He'd lost weight, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. His hair was gray where it had been dark, and his hands shook slightly as he held a glass of whiskey. He looked at me, and there was something in his eyes that might have been regret. Or maybe just self-pity. It was hard to tell. "Victoria," he said, his voice a rasp. "I know you're angry. You have every right to be. I made terrible mistakes. I destroyed lives. I destroyed our family. But please, don't punish your mother and sister for what I did." "Punish them?" I asked, feeling a bitter laugh rise in my throat. "I'm not punishing anyone. This isn't about punishment. This is about survival. You taught me that, Dad. You taught me that in this world, you take what you can get, you protect yourself, and you don't let sentiment get in the way of securing your future." "This is different," he said desperately. "This is family." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You don't get to play the family card now. Not after what you did. Not after what they did." I gestured to my mother and Natalie. Family is supposed to protect each other, support each other, stand by each other when things get hard. But when things got hard, you all turned on me. You made me the villain so you could be the victims. You threw me away. "We were wrong," my father said, and for the first time, he sounded sincere. "We were scared and desperate, and we lashed out at the wrong person. I'm sorry, Victoria. I'm truly sorry." An apology. After everything, an apology. But it was too late. Too little and too late. "I appreciate the apology," I said. "But it doesn't change anything. The house is mine. The sale is going through. And you need to be out by next Friday." My mother made a sound halfway between a sob and a moan. Natalie's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this," Natalie said, her voice low and dangerous. "You think you've won, but you haven't. You've just proven that you're exactly what we always said you were. Selfish, heartless, a failure as a daughter and as a human being." I looked at her for a long moment, really looked at her, and I realized something. Her opinion didn't matter anymore. Her judgment, which had shaped my sense of self for so many years, had no power over me now. "You know what, Natalie?" I said, my voice calm and clear. "You're right. I am a failure. I failed to be the person you wanted me to be. I failed to care about the things you cared about. I failed to let you define me. I failed to let you destroy me. And that failure, it's the greatest success of my life." Then said Victoria, "Please relax for a bit. Perpetual, cool, and honest. We can work something out. We can come to an arrangement. Just don't do this." I stopped at the threshold and turned back to look at them one last time. My father, the criminal who'd stolen millions. My mother, the enabler who'd chosen reputation over truth. My sister, the golden child who'd never had to question whether she was enough. "The money from the sale will be in my account next Friday," I said. And then, this house, this monument to everything you valued, will belong to someone else. To a couple who'll actually make it a home instead of a museum. To people who'll fill it with love instead of lies. You have 6 days to move out. I suggest you start packing. We have nowhere to go, my mother said, desperately. We've lost everything. Our savings are frozen. Our assets are being seized. We don't have anything. Then I guess you'll have to start over, I said. Build a new life from scratch. Figure out who you are without the money and the house and the status. Maybe it'll be good for you. Maybe you'll finally learn what actually matters. Natalie took a step toward me, and for a moment I thought she might actually hit me. But she stopped, her fists clenched, trembling with rage. I hope you're happy. I hope that money keeps you warm at night, because it's all you'll have. You've burned every bridge. You have no family now. I know, I said, and I'm okay with that. I walked out of that house and into the November sunshine, and I didn't look back. Behind me, I heard my mother crying, heard my father's voice trying to comfort her, heard Natalie cursing under her breath. But I kept walking, got into my car, and drove away. I went to a park, one of my favorite spots overlooking the ocean, and I sat on a bench and I cried. Not tears of regret or grief, but tears of release, of letting go of 28 years of trying to be enough for people who would never see me, of finally choosing myself. The sale closed the following Friday at exactly 2 p.m. I sat in the lawyer's office, signed papers, watched as the money was transferred into my account. $1.25 million, minus legal fees, and real estate commissions and taxes, left me with just over $1 million. I'd never seen that much money in my life. I looked at the number on the screen, and I felt, not joy exactly, not triumph, just a deep, quiet sense of closure. A chapter ending, a new one beginning. Marcus handed me the final paperwork. Congratulations, he said. The house is theirs now. You're officially free of all this. Thank you, I said. For everything. My pleasure. And hey, if you need any help finding a new place, give me a call. After handling that family drama, showing you some nice apartments will be a vacation. I laughed. A real genuine laugh that felt good in my chest. My family vacated the house as required. Sarah told me later, she'd asked Marcus for my contact information to thank me, that when they did their final walkthrough before moving in, the place had been stripped. My family had taken everything they could, furniture, art, even some of the light fixtures. They'd left it as empty as they possibly could. One last act of spite. But we don't mind, Sarah had said cheerfully. It means we get to start completely fresh. Make it exactly what we want. I heard through the grapevine, Vancouver's wealthy social circles are small and gossipy, that my family had moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Burnaby. A far cry from Shaughnessy. A bland, generic building with thin walls and a view of a parking lot. The social invitations my mother had once received constantly dried up completely. The charity boards quietly removed her name. No one wanted to be associated with the Chen family scandal. Natalie had to leave her prestigious firm. The connection to my father was too toxic. She found a job at a much smaller company, a step down in every way. No more corner office, no more expense account, no more prestige. And my father was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for fraud, embezzlement, and a dozen other charges. 8 years in a minimum security facility, but still prison, still a criminal. Still the man who destroyed dozens of lives to fund a lifestyle built on lies. About a month after the sale, I got a letter from my mother. Her elegant handwriting was shaky, written on cheap stationery instead of the expensive monogrammed cards she used to favor. It wasn't an apology. It was an accusation disguised as hurt feelings. She wrote about how hard things were now, how small their apartment was. How humiliating it was to run into old friends at the grocery store and have them look away, pretending not to see her. How she had to take a part-time job for the first time in her life because they needed the money. How Natalie was struggling. How everyone was suffering. And then at the end, the kicker. I hope that money was worth it. I hope it keeps you warm at night when you're old and alone, because that's what you'll be, Victoria. Alone. You've burned every bridge. You've destroyed your family to satisfy your greed. You have no one now. And that money, that blood money you took from us, won't love you back. It won't be there when you need someone. You made your choice. I hope you can live with it. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it carefully, put it in a drawer, and went on with my day. She was trying to make me feel guilty, trying to manipulate me one last time into feeling like I was the villain in their story. But I wasn't. I knew the truth. They had failed me long before I'd ever failed them. They had rejected me first. They had blamed me for crimes I didn't commit. They had thrown me out to protect themselves. All I'd done was refuse to be destroyed along with them. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. So what did I do with the money? I took some of it, about $200,000, and I invested it in Youth Voices, the nonprofit where I worked. We expanded into 2 new locations, hired more staff, reached more kids. We went from serving 50 teenagers a year to serving over 200. We added new programs, music therapy, creative writing workshops, digital art classes. We became one of the most respected youth art programs in the province, and I watched kids who'd been written off by everyone finally find their voices, finally create something beautiful, finally believe they had value. I used another chunk, about $100,000, to set up a scholarship fund for art students from low-income families. Kids who wanted to pursue creative careers but didn't have the resources. Kids who would have been told, like I was told, that art wasn't practical, wasn't valuable, wasn't a real career. Every year, we gave 10 students full scholarships to Emily Carr. 10 kids who got to follow their dreams. And I bought myself a house. Not a mansion in Shaughnessy, nothing ostentatious or designed to impress. A small, cozy house in North Vancouver with big windows and a view of the mountains. It had 2 bedrooms, one for me and one that I converted into a studio for my own art. It had a garden where I planted vegetables and flowers. It had a front porch where I could sit with my coffee in the morning and watch the sunrise. It was mine, really mine, not a symbol of anything, not a monument to success or status. Just a home. A place where I could be myself completely and authentically, without judgment or expectation. I also started painting again. Not for work, not for anyone else, just for me. I'd forgotten what that felt like, to create purely for the joy of creation. I filled my studio with canvases, experimenting with colors and techniques, letting myself play and explore without worrying about whether it was good enough or meaningful enough or impressive enough. And slowly, carefully, I built a new life. I made friends, real friends who valued me for who I was. I dated a little, nothing serious at first, but eventually I met someone. His name was Daniel, and he was a high school teacher who spent his weekends volunteering at an animal shelter. He was kind and funny, and completely uninterested in wealth, or status, or impressing anyone. He loved me for my weird sense of humor, and my passion for my work, and my slightly obsessive plant collection. We took things slow, but 2 years after I sold the house, he moved into my little place in North Van. And it felt right. It felt like home. One evening, about 3 years after everything happened, I was at a gallery opening for one of my former students. She'd gone from a quiet, traumatized 14-year-old to a confident artist with her own show, and I was so proud I could burst. I was standing there, looking at her paintings, when someone tapped me on the shoulder. I turned around, and it was a woman I vaguely recognized from my old neighborhood in Shaughnessy. She'd been friends with my mother, part of the charity board's social circle. "Victoria," she said, clearly uncomfortable. "I thought that was you. It's been a long time." "It has," I agreed. She hesitated, looking like she wanted to say something but wasn't sure how. "I heard about everything. Your family, the house. I'm sorry it all happened that way. Thank you, I said neutrally. She leaned in, lowering her voice. Your mother. She tells people you stole from them, that you took advantage of your father's situation to steal the family home, that you betrayed them. I felt a flash of anger, but it was distant, muted. And what do you think? She looked me in the eye. I think your father stole from half of Vancouver, including my husband. I think your mother always cared more about appearances than truth. And I think you did what you had to do to survive. She paused. For what it's worth, I'm glad you got out. Thank you, I said, and I meant it. That means a lot. She smiled and walked away, and I turned back to the paintings. My student saw me and came over, beaming. Miss Chen, what do you think? I think you're incredibly talented, I said, and I think you should be very proud of yourself. I couldn't have done this without you, she said. Without the program, without you believing in me when no one else did. And that, right there, was worth more than any house, any amount of money, any family acceptance. The knowledge that I'd helped someone find their voice, that I'd made a difference, that I'd used my pain to create something good. The years continued to unfold. I kept working with youth voices, watching it grow into something bigger than I'd ever imagined. I kept painting, kept creating, kept building a life that felt authentic and true. Daniel and I got married in a small ceremony on the beach, surrounded by friends and colleagues and kids from the program. No family on my side, but I didn't mind. I'd built my own family, one based on choice and love and shared values. About 5 years after I sold the house, I got one more letter. This one was from my father, written from prison. It was long and rambling, full of justifications and excuses and explanations. He talked about the pressure he'd been under, the expectations he'd had to meet, the fear of failure that had driven him to make increasingly desperate decisions. He talked about how he'd only wanted to provide for his family, to give us the best life possible. And then, near the end, he wrote, I know you think I'm a monster, Victoria. Maybe I am, but I loved you. I loved all of you. I just didn't know how to show it in a way that didn't involve money and success and material things. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I failed you as a father. I'm sorry for everything. An apology. A real one this time. Or at least something that sounded like it might be real. But it didn't change anything. Because it wasn't about whether he loved me. It was about how he'd treated me. It was about the years of dismissal, the constant message that I wasn't enough, the judgment and criticism and casual cruelty. Love without respect isn't love. It's control, it's manipulation, it's abuse disguised as care. I wrote back. Just one sentence. I forgive you, but I don't need you anymore. I sent it and never wrote again. Because forgiveness wasn't about letting him back into my life. It was about letting go of the anger, the hurt, the desperate need for him to finally see me and value me. Forgiveness was about freeing myself from the weight of caring what he thought. More years passed. I heard through the same social grapevine that my mother had started working full-time at a retail store, that Natalie had gotten married to someone none of us knew, a quiet wedding with no fanfare. That my father had been released from prison after serving 6 years and was working as a grocery store clerk, forbidden from ever working in finance again. Their perfect life, built on theft and lies and superiority, was completely gone, and in its place was something ordinary, something normal, maybe even something real, though I'd never know for sure. I thought about them sometimes, but not with anger, not with regret. Just with a distant sort of acknowledgement that they had existed in my life, and now they didn't. They were characters in a story I'd finished reading, people I'd known once but didn't know anymore. My life, meanwhile, kept getting better. Youth Voices expanded to 4 cities across British Columbia. The scholarship fund grew, helping dozens of students pursue their dreams. I was promoted to executive director of the organization, and we started getting national recognition for our work. I painted, I traveled, I loved, I lived. And I never once regretted selling that house. Because it was never about the money. It was never about revenge. Not really. It was about taking control of my own story. It was about refusing to let people who didn't value me define my worth. It was about choosing myself when no one else would. So was it worth it? The estrangement, the burned bridges, the permanent break with my family? Yes. Every single day, yes. Because I learned something that changed everything. I learned that you can't earn love from people who don't have it to give. You can't win approval from people whose standards are designed for you to fail. You can't fit into spaces that were never meant for you. And more importantly, I learned that you don't have to. I learned that the only opinion that truly matters is your own. That your worth isn't determined by your family, your bank account, your job title, or your address. It's determined by how you treat yourself, how you show up in the world, how you choose yourself, even when, especially when, no one else does. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. And that it's not only okay to walk away from them, it's necessary. It's self-preservation. It's survival. I learned that you can build a new family, one based on choice rather than obligation, on love rather than duty, on mutual respect rather than hierarchical expectations. And I learned that I was never the failure they said I was. They failed. They failed to see me, to value me, to love me the way I deserved. Their failure became my freedom. So yes, I took their $1.25 million empire, their monument to greed and status and superiority, and I turned it into my freedom, my purpose, my authentic life. They called me worthless. They dismissed me as a failure. They threw me away. But I proved them wrong, not by becoming rich or famous or conventionally successful, but by becoming someone I could be proud of, by building a life that mattered, by helping others find their voices, by choosing truth over appearance, meaning over money, authenticity over approval. And that, more than anything, is the sweetest form of justice. I still live in my little house in North Vancouver. Daniel and I adopted a dog, a rescue named Pepper, who's afraid of thunder and loves to sleep on our bed. I still work with kids who've been told they don't matter. I still teach women how to find their voices after trauma. I still paint in my studio, experimenting and playing and creating just for the joy of it. And every single morning, I wake up and choose myself, choose my values, choose my path, choose my life. Because I'm not a failure, I'm a survivor, I'm a fighter. I'm a woman who refused to be erased, who refused to accept someone else's definition of success, who refused to let my family's dysfunction destroy me. And that house, that symbol of everything they thought mattered, it's just a building now, owned by people who hopefully fill it with laughter and love instead of lies and status anxiety. It's just a structure, 4 walls and a roof, with no more power over me. But me, I carry my home inside me now. My sense of self, my worth, my purpose, none of it is tied to a physical place or other people's approval. It's mine, internal and unshakable. And no one can ever take that away. If you feel my words, show your support by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. And tell me from which city you belong, so I can see how far a woman's impactful voice can reach. Help me build this community so we can bring more truthful stories for you. This is my story, the story of how I was dismissed as worthless and took back everything they thought I didn't deserve. The story of how I stopped being their failure and started being my own success. The story of how I survived, and more than that, how I thrived. And if you're out there, feeling like you're not enough, feeling dismissed or diminished or broken, I want you to know something. You are enough. You always have been. The people who can't see that, they're the ones with the problem, not you. So take your power back. Rewrite your story. Build your empire, whatever that means to you. It doesn't have to be a mansion or $1 million. It can be a small house filled with love, It can be work that matters. It can be art that speaks truth. It can be relationships based on mutual respect. It can be the simple, profound act of choosing yourself every single day. Because you deserve it. And you don't need anyone's permission to claim it. You just need to choose yourself. Choose your truth. Choose your path. Choose your life. And trust me when I tell you, that choice will change everything. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. Never let anyone convince you otherwise.